First, thanks a lot for organizing this nice event, and it's great to be here. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit from data science to cryptography, and especially a very evil setting for cryptography. So today I'm going to talk about Cliptography, which is cryptography in the post-Snowden era. And the meaning of this term will become clear in the middle of my talk. And I'm Qiang. I'm just beginning my journey as an assistant professor at NJIT. And this based on joint works with Alex Russell, Moti Yang, which is not here yet, and Hongsheng Zhou. So we all know that modern cryptography have achieved splendid success in the last couple of decades. And from the foundation point of view, cryptographers have tried to turn cryptography from art to science, try to build rigorous foundation and sound arguing framework. And also, there are a lot of advanced cryptographic tools have been proposed, and with very highly advanced functionalities. It seems that we have more versatile tools to use to protect our privacy. Well, the actual situation of privacy and security in practice is far from satisfactory. Actually, in my point of view, there's actually a big gap between theory and practice in reality. And I believe some of you also agree with me. This picture originally was tried to describe post-election life, which is also kind of similar here. And there are a lot of reasons for this situation. And I would like to focus on one particular reason. So there's an implicit assumption essentially in almost all cryptographic definitional models that security can only be guaranteed unless the software or hardware implementation faithfully realize the cryptographic functionality, right? And normally the situation is like cryptographers have designed algorithms, analyze it, and then their job is done. Someone gonna implement it correctly, while putting trust on implementation obviously is dangerous. And besides the unintentional software bugs we see every day, more and more evidence was shown that intentional sabotage on crypto algorithms and standards have emerged. Here are a little bit more examples. So this is something called Xcode Ghost, which is a pirate version of Xcode. It embeds backdoor in every single app that is compiled from it. So you can use this backdoor to steal your personal information. And this is the notorious Volkswagen emission scandal. They intentionally tune their device to perform differently when they are tested for emission, right? But the their specification never say so. And most of you, I believe, heard of this touching letter from Apple that they claim they do not want to cooperate with FBI to unlock even a terrorist iPhone. But the hidden meaning behind the letter, maybe leaked unintentionally, is that they do have the capability of unlocking everybody's iPhone. So this means that there must exist some kind of special power or backdoor enables Apple to do so. Quite interestingly, those type of recent real-world attacks actually were formally studied 20 years ago in a subject called Kleptography, which is the science of stealing information subliminally from black box implementations, which was done by Adam Yang and Moti Yang. And a very simple example of klepto attack can be seen as follows. Most of us know RSA encryption. This is a version of a textbook version of RSA Key Generation could be as follows. First, you choose two large prime, multiply them, and choose a random exponent as the public key. Well, if the implementation itself is malicious, well, maybe it still generates public key secret keys. But the malicious implementation may carry some specific instruction, tells the malicious implementation to do something different. For example, still the malicious implementation gonna generate two large random primes and multiply them. But for the random exponent, instead of choosing it uniformly, the malicious implementation gonna try to directly encode one of the prime factor into part of the public prime, a public key. So it's obvious that whoever has this backdoor information can directly decrypt this part, one of the prime factor from the public key, then completely break the security of RSA. While what's worse is that to everyone else who does not know the backdoor, this maliciously generated parameters or keys looks perfectly good. So in this set, by doing black box testing, there's no way to find out this implementation is actually being subverted. And this type of attack actually was long considered to be existing only in paper and books and theory. But 20 years later, this gentleman, or maybe this man, tells the world, theory can actually go to practice, but not in a nice way. So in the Snowden revelation, there's one example that shows NSA exactly carries out this type of attack. So it's called the dual EC pseudorandom generator. I believe many of you heard of it. So if the public parameter is chosen uniformly according to the specification, the pseudorandom generator will be a good, somehow good pseudorandom generator will pop out pseudorandom bits. But the actual parameter recommended by NIST was actually containing a backdoor that is only known to NSA, which enables NSA to predict the future outputs from the current one, thus completely break the security of pseudorandom generator. And again, this maliciously generated public parameter looks perfectly good. So, and although breaking pseudorandom generator might not seem to be so big deal, but actually there's immediate real-world ramification. This because dual EC is as a building block widely using a lot of real-world protocols, which might hurt the security of this large-scale internet secure protocols, and also some secure hardware. This opportunity can be exploited by attackers. So what's the real threat of such kind of cryptographic attack? Well, malicious implementation might leak private information to the implementation provider. This might not be something so surprising because the malicious implementation is designed and meant to do so. But this can be done even in a very subliminal way. So basically, the output distribution of a maliciously generated malicious implementation can be even statistically close to that of the specification. So black box testing is, in this case, in many scenarios of such attack, essentially becomes impossible. And one of the most notable recent such kind of attack was done by Polari, Patterson, and Rogway, which essentially showed that just using randomized encryption algorithm, which is the most widely spread used crypto primitive, but the malicious encryption algorithm can use the ciphertext just as a carrier to leak private information, for example, the secret keys, to the implementation provider. And a very natural idea is just using those ciphertexts as a steganographic channel to embed the actual information the malicious implementation tried to leak. So conceptually, we can view this malicious implementation as a little brother, while the actual adversary is a big brother. They are trying to communicate with each other in a subliminal way. And this steganography actually can be done in a very easy way by simply doing just rejection sampling. So this randomized algorithm, you're going to repeatedly generate ciphertext until you choose one that is preferable to the adversary, which enables him to learn like one single bit. And after the Snowden revelation, our community started to react, and a lot of great works emerged, including the BPR paper. And however, most of them are quite depressing impossibility results. Essentially, most of the results are describing better attacks or easier, make the attacks more general or maybe simpler. While for the state of the art of defending is a bit less of a satisfactory. Because of the subliminal channel attack is so devastating, essentially it can be carried out or generalized to any randomized algorithm if it's maliciously implemented. So it's suggested in BPR paper that maybe we have to give it up. Well, in some setting maybe okay, but there are several settings, obviously it's not okay to do so. For example, key generation can never be done in a deterministic way. That's why in many of the works, they have to assume key generation component needs to be trusted or honestly implemented. Furthermore, as the an encryption algorithm has to be used deterministic encryption. Well, it might be fine for symmetric encryption in some setting, but for the golden standard of public encryption, the semantic security can never be achieved. Also, the correctness of this malicious implementation is essentially just assumed. There's also another line of interesting work considering how to defend. Essentially, let's suggest, suppose we can build a firewall which can faithfully carry out a re-randomization operation. Then it's simple to see that maybe you can just flatten the distribution, so destroy the subliminal channel, right? But then the question is, if you are trusted to build a firewall yourself, why not build your encryption yourself, right? So how well do we get this trusted re-randomization operation? It's actually a complex cryptographic operation. So the situation is a bit less satisfactory. So we cryptographers should be tough to do something more useful stuff. And actually, the status of the defending against this such devastating attack is quite open. The basic situation, we don't even have a widely agreed model. What do we mean by security in this new setting, right? And essentially, we have no idea what to do. We have no good idea what to do about this subverted randomized algorithm, and very few functionality have been considered. So there's a long way to go. It's really just a starting point. Our long-term goal is try to revisit the whole field of cryptography to build a parallel theory, which we call Cryptography. The original meaning of Cryptography, which was crafted by Moti, is clipping the power of such Kleptographic attacks. We're going to see that maybe every single piece of result in crypto needs to be revisited in some way. Some might be easy, some become totally unclear. So we do make some effort and made some progress along this line. And first, of course, we need the definition. We cryptographers love definitions. And we propose a general definitional framework which enables us to derive a hierarchy of security definitions that capture different settings of this kleptographic attack and the security in this setting. And one simple note I would like to make is that we allow all algorithms in the cryptographic scheme to be subverted by the adversary. So there's no trusted component, no trusted cryptographic functional component, say encryption, decryption, key generation, in particular key generation. With the basic terminology set up, we consider whether can we mitigate the damage of such devastating attack. Maybe at some setting, by properly control the public channel or redesign the specification of the algorithm, maybe a little bit leakage doesn't really hurt the security. So, for example, digital signature, 1 bit leakage might still be fine. The eventual goal, we want to destroy such subliminal channel to save the randomized algorithm completely, but with a minimal trust. We don't want to build the put trust on complex cryptographic component. Right. First, let's take a quick look of this Cryptographic model. What do we mean by security in this setting? It's actually quite simple. So there's an adversary who provides the malicious implementations, and regular users simply take it and hoping it's secure, use it. While also there exists a third party called Watchdog, who has the specification. So this watchdog can be considered like an industry lab or NIST or some government agency or universities. They're gonna implement the specification themselves, and they will take the implementation, interrogate it, and compare with that of the specification. So here, the testing is done in a black box way. I guess some of you might have some questions about the watchdog testing. I'm going to talk it very soon. So first, I would like to emphasize the black box testing actually might be the right model, because in some setting, the implementation might carry the company don't want to release the source code, or maybe it's even just implemented in the hardware. So it's hopeless to require source code analysis in some way. So the model basically allows 3 participants instead of 2 participants in the usual cryptographic definition. So again, there's still adversary, but now the adversary has extra power. He's allowed to supply all the implementation of the cryptographic implementation. while previously all this is done by the challenger, or it's trusted simply. The challenger is also there, but now the challenger is restricted in a way that he has to use the malicious implementation to play the game with the adversary. And then the third-party watchdog will do the black box testing, but he has the specification. One interesting observation here is that we consider the adversary in this setting. They are very malicious, but they might be proud. So they don't want the subversion to be detected by anyone. Say it's done by NSA. Obviously, NSA don't want the world to know what they are doing. Similarly to big companies. And also, this kind of necessary condition, because if you allow the adversary to arbitrarily subvert the implementation, he can completely replace it with something totally different. So the notion here then becomes very easy to understand. The security in this cryptographic setting basically says either the watchdog can find the difference just by doing black box testing between the implementation and the specification, or the security can actually be preserved even if users use this malicious implementation, right? And actually depend on the watchdog power quantifier, there exist many different versions of this definition. I guess some of you have the question, since there exists subliminal channel attack, there's no chance for the watchdog can tell the malicious implementation is different. So what's the point of having a watchdog, right? So it's true. In general, the watchdog cannot provide much guarantee. But in some special cases, the watchdog can provide a little guarantee. For example, in the following two cases, if the implementation is a deterministic algorithm, and the input distribution is even public, so then we can essentially, the watchdog can essentially enforce the implementation to be almost consistent, right? Just sample and compute and compare. Very easy. And also the randomness generation, the watchdog can never guarantee the output to be uniform, but the watchdog can at least guarantee, but just by repeatedly running this randomness generation to see if there's much collision, right? So if there's no collision, that means at least the randomness generation have sufficient entropy in some sense. So this tiny guarantee obviously cannot provide much confidence of security, right? So our job is to redesign the whole specification and try to amplify this tiny guarantee provided by the watchdog to actually to preserve security of cryptographic schemes. The first thing we want to consider is to mitigate the subliminal channel in key generation. So key generation cannot be deterministic, and we don't want it to be trusted. So one particular example we choose is the backdoor PRG, which actually which formalized by Dodis and two of his students, I forgot their names, and Arjus and Tom Ristenpark. And they formalized the concept actually of DUEC. What do they mean by backdoor PRG? Basically, there's malicious parameter generation, generates the public parameter, and the stretch algorithm takes the parameter and the random seed output the final random string. Then to the adversary, the big brother here actually he can clearly tell this is pseudo random string. This is not a real random string. But for anyone else who does not have the backdoor, it looks perfectly good. A very simple idea, a very simple definition. And they actually prove that however you do, try to clean the output of the backdoor, the PRG. So you apply hash function, you use random oracle. It's impossible to clean the output. Still, the adversary can tell. It's either pseudo-random, or it can tell for probability 1 that it's not pseudo-random. So we are inspired by very simple conventional wisdom. There's something called nothing on my sleeve, especially in our settings, nothing on my sleeve numbers, which was actually widely used in security practice, right? Say we want some public known parameters, then we can choose part of the, say, pi or e, which is the gift given by the mother nature. Hopefully the nature is not backdoored by God. So no one knows the actual backdoor. But this is not enough yet, because this is some kind of fixed number, right? We want to generate the parameter on the fly. So, but very easily we can apply the idea that we want some nothing up my sleeve parameter or whatever, keys. So very similar idea we can do is that take a malicious key generation and also a hash function, but the hash function is maliciously implemented. So both these building blocks are implemented by the adversary, but we insist instead of implementing one single piece, the adversary should supply with two components. So the actual final public parameter gonna be the one after hash. And also then the stretching algorithm essentially becomes another algorithm use a different parameter. A very, very simple idea. But why it works? And the idea is also quite simple. So any backdoor that is embedded in the key generation algorithm, right? It can only influence like a very sparse subset of the parameter. I mean, otherwise, if you just randomly choose one, then you're gonna hit a very bad parameter, right? Then the specification itself won't be secure. So then dispersing a potentially polluted parameter, we are likely to map it to a safe region, even though this hash function is subverted, but it's a deterministic algorithm, and the input is public. So the watchdog can essentially enforce the consistency. And this simple idea can be bring much further. That first, the implication is that instead of hashing the output, but we hash the parameter, we can gives us some result from impossibility to feasibility. But similarly, we can say with trapdoor one-way permutation, then we can do the similar thing. Actually use such subversion-resistant trapdoor one-way permutation. We can say one of the most widely used digital signature scheme, which is hash and sign. And I won't have time to talk in detail about it. And further, a little bit theoretical observation is that some classical reduction in cryptography actually cannot go through in this new setting. We need to change the scheme. So it gives us some lesson that many things might be different now. Well, our next question and real question is actually how far we can push this method. And can we save actually the most fundamental building block, encryption? So let's try to split out the randomness generation from the encryption algorithm, because it is actually how it is done in practice. Right? Whenever a software needs some random coin, you need to call some library. And we hash the random coin. Actually, let's treat these two parts actually trustedly component. And only the randomness generation is malicious. Very sadly, the subliminal channel actually still exists, even if we split and hash the random coin here. Why the intuition is actually very simple, because the randomness generation going to continue doing rejection sampling, right? By taking these two parts into consideration, embed into the rejection sampling condition until he hit a random coin, which is preferable to give the preferable answer here, that he will use this random coin. So then this is a very bad situation that even one bit of leakage will essentially render this standard semantic security impossible, or public encryption, right? What can we do in this setting? We cannot just give it up. And kind of we go back to the original setting. But now let's just try one step further. We are inspired by another conventional wisdom, which is essentially used everywhere in software engineering, crypto engineering. It's the modular design. And it's kind of implicit in essentially everywhere. So if we treat this randomness generation, it's one single piece of code, but instead of write once, we write twice independently. So now with or maybe treat them as two independent components. Let's make it simple. So the first component generates one random coin, second component generates another random coin. Then we feed both of them into the malicious hash. Then actually we can prove the output of this randomness generated this way can be even uniform to the adversary. Note here that every component here is uniform, is malicious. So why? Let's first look at the basic intuition, why it works, right? Why just running one more time make something impossible become possible? So the intuition is also quite simple. Suppose the randomness generation is just a piece of code, is a stateless thing, suppose. And as we said, an offline watchdog, just by repeatedly checking, can guarantee the randomness generation at least output some kind of unpredictable output. Well, because the two pieces of code are run in an isolated fashion, they cannot coordinate online, even though they share some global backdoor or states at the beginning, but they cannot coordinate online. So one piece of the output of one piece of randomness generation actually looks unpredictable to the other piece during the execution. So they cannot coordinate to do a global rejection sampling. So essentially, it becomes like a two-source randomness extractor in some way. We can compile it to a uniform stream. And someone of you might also ask, would this be a kind of a new assumption instead of assuming it's a deterministic or have a firewall? But if we have a closer look, this type of idea is everywhere, right? When we design encryption scheme, so there's a key generation, there's randomness generation, you need to run the key generation first and pass the key to the encryption algorithm. You need to run the randomness generation to pass the randomness to the encryption algorithm. Well, here we bring this modular design idea into more detail or maybe more delicate way that we bring it into actually one single algorithm. So originally, this whole thing is one single stuff, right? Now we decouple one algorithm into several pieces of functional components. Still, every component is used as a black box. And moreover, this type of isolated or maybe independent execution is also implicit in all previous works. Since suppose you have a trusted component, right? This trusted component can never be correlated with a malicious or subverted component. They have to be implicitly isolated in whatever way. So basically, we going deeper into the existing thing, find out actually we can just pick out one simple isolation, make it more explicit, and use this to defend against the subversion. So how to instantiate it is maybe there are a couple of ideas. Some are possible, or some maybe needs more further study. Actually, maybe we can motivate and maybe programming language researcher or software engineer researcher to consider how to guarantee better isolation. One possible example to run two pieces of code in different virtual machine, and this machine itself is backed up by Intel SGX. But SGX here is only trusted for isolation; it's not trusted for anything else. And also, maybe we can even really use two physically different sources, right? We have a local random source. Maybe we can take another one from NIST. Maybe even NIST is malicious in this case. Jointly, we can get a good random source. But the implication of this will be great. Again, if we run the backdoor the randomness generation once and try to clean the output, it's impossible. But now, if we only run it twice, so we have a backdoor randomness generation, we have a longer seed. Just run the same randomness generation twice on different half, then hash them, we're gonna get the pure randomness. And in turn, it enables us to save the public encryption to achieve the standard security, which is hopeless before. This is basically the structure, no big deal. So I would like to spend maybe half a minute to do some reflection on this. We call it split program framework. Essentially, it's a modular design in this particular setting for per algorithm. So first, due to the subliminal channel attack, we know it's essentially hopeless to have. It's very hard to have any meaningful positive result if we use black box implementation as it is. But also, on the other hand, it's impossible it can never be practical to assume full source code analysis. So our model essentially somehow lie in between. It's kind of a hybrid model where we decouple complex functionality into several components. And each component still is a cryptographic component, has some functionality, and each component will be used as a black box. And we want the splitting the number of components as few as possible, say just 2 or 3 pieces. And this just simple splitting may give some suggestion to the specification design in the future. You have to enforce every randomized algorithm to explicitly provide several different components. Well, and also at the same time, here, obviously, the code to glue this component needs to be trusted, right? You need to pass the information flow correctly. But this type of specific functionality, maybe we can ask to release the source code and to do source code analysis for this one particular functionality. And we can also sort other cryptographic functionality as a black box. So quick summary is that it's indeed possible, it's not impossible to have some meaningful result in this very devastating setting by simply retuning the specification. And actually, as a theory guy, sometimes I ignore, just on behalf of myself, I ignore what's happening in the security practice. But this type of research gives me a lesson that many custom wisdom, conventional wisdom actually is very helpful. Just we need to do a little bit of work to make it more formal and robust. While from a theoretical point of view, the whole landscape might be drastically different. If you heard of like in Pagliazzo's 5 words, might be completely different. The relation from here, there, everything needs to be revisited. And nothing is so obvious in this new setting, just with one more dimension of cryptography. And also there are many open problems. To us, and it's interesting thing is have connection to many different topics, like program synthesis and self-correcting programs and many other theory topics as well. And that's my talk. Thanks.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
I have no background in cryptography, but I see a lot of things that are relevant to quality assurance. What happens if your watchdog becomes malicious, either intentionally or by receiving malicious code that can go into the black box?
That's a great question. First, we split the watchdog into 2 halves, right? So the code he's receiving for the testing is already malicious. He's trying to test. But the functionality, the job is doing by the watchdog. For now, we have to assume the watchdog needs to do a faithful testing. Otherwise, then it essentially becomes no trusted point at all, right? Then the implementation can be arbitrary. So, but it's a great question how to...
The people who know best how to beat a system are the people who have to make sure that the specifications are followed, because they understand the process.
Yes. And here, actually, we try to limit the job of watchdog as few as possible, right? From here, what we see, just repeated sampling, or just sample and compute and compare. That's it. Just equality, basically. And that's definitely an interesting question. Can we even push it further, right? To make even less trust on watchdog.
Yes. Quick question. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.